This is TWiT.
All right, and now we round out the show with the brown liquor pick of the week.
I just brought
Well,
that page up. I got to look at this.
And there's two links there, Kev, for a reason. Because the Mackmyra story, this is the Swedish whiskey. Because I was in Sweden last week. This is the one I wrote for last week and was unable to present.
Right.
Mackmyra is actually a village about 200 kilometers north of Stockholm. It was originally a mining area. This is the ironworks going back to like the 1600s, although the ironworks finally shut down in the 1970s as it just became too expensive to operate. It says, so this is not old whiskey. This is new whiskey. Mackmyra was formed in 1999. 8 friends on a skiing trip, all bringing different whiskeys, ended up talking about whiskey and why are there no great Swedish whiskeys? The Swedes make their own alcohol. Theirs is aquavit, but they thought, well, why couldn't we make whiskey? One of those 8 is a fellow by the name of Magnus Dandenel, who became the CEO. So they started operations in 2002. Took a little while to get going, but to make a product quickly, they did a clever thing. They use 30-liter casks, little casks, instead of 500 liters or 600 liters, 30. So you got a lot more wood contact for your new make. So you age the spirit pretty quickly there. It has its own quirks, but they definitely tried to make a Swedish whiskey. And of course, the Swedes grow their own barley, so that's fine. They even have their own peat. So in fact, they went all out when they first started making product to say, can we get every ingredient for our whiskey down to the oak barrels in Sweden, in fact, within 150 kilometers of distillery, and they ended up pulling it off except for the yeast. The yeast actually comes from a separate source. So their original distillery was actually in the old Mackmyra ironworks. If you go to that building now, it says Mackmyra Distillery on the side of it. But after a few years making the money, they built a new distillery as well. And everything, they went on the modern style. So a lot of stainless steel, not a lot of wood. The only thing that's not Swedish are the Forsyth stills. So these are the Forsyth is the guy who make the stills in Scotland, and that's where they got their stills from. They use Swedish oak as much as they can, but of course buy bourbon casks because they're arguably cheaper than the actual Swedish wood. And they have problems with temperature. It's too cold in the winter and too hot in the summer. It's not the consistencies that Scotland has. And so one of the tricks they do to age their whiskey is they use the old iron mine. They came with the license with the iron works. So they actually they cleared out a chunk of the mine and used it for barrel storage because temperature controls are a bit stronger. And they went on from there to actually build storage facilities all over Sweden, up above the Arctic Circle, down on some islands, so they could sort of mix and match. So very quickly, these guys took off as a pretty successful whiskey maker, including hiring a woman by the name of Angela D'Arizio as their master distiller starting in 2004. She was the expert and she really liked the experimentation they were doing. And so the whiskey, the particular version I'm talking about today, if you're going to go buy some Mackmyra, because they make a lot of special editions, but the Brukswhisky is their fundamental. It started coming out in 2010. The earliest have no age on them, which means they're 3 to 8 years old. They're relatively young. If you look hard, you can find older ones now. There's like a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old. 2011, they built a new distillery they called Gravity. They had this whole idea of building it as a tower. It's 37 meters tall, so over 100 feet high. And the idea was to lift the basics, the water, barley, and yeast to the top of the structure and use gravity to work its way down into barrels at the bottom of the building, which then go to storage. The design of the distillery was to do experimentations with different barrel combinations, different aging strategies, and so forth, so they could make a variety of whiskeys. By 2013, they made their first peated whiskey called Svendruck. They still use the drying technique with electric heat, but then they introduce smoke to it in the finishing steps just to give a little bit of peat flavor to it. Mackmyra peaked in 2019. They were winning awards all over the place. You could also buy custom casking. So it became a very hip thing for a company to do like a tour of Mackmyra, and you'd get a 30-liter cask, lay it up yourself, and then it would go into storage until it was aged enough and you could do your own custom bottling. Where the story takes a turn is when the pandemic hits. And I think it's because the company was highly leveraged that Magnus realizes that they're in trouble. It's tough to run the company in the pandemic scenario. So he brings in a professional. He steps aside. This is the founder. Now he's been running the company for better part of 20 years. Steps aside to bring in a guy named Johan Larsson, who used to work for a company called Peak Performance as the CFO to sort of optimize the company. It appears to not go well because within a year, DRZO, their master distiller that has been around now for 15 years, immediately leaves. Although before she goes in 2021, her last product is called Intelligence, which I haven't been able to get my hands on, but it was a version of whiskey, quote, made with AI. So they collaborated with Thoughtworks to build an AI model based on the data streams coming out of the Gravity distillery with all their different aging and blending and barrel options to try and find an optimal whiskey. And that's what Intelligence is. And it's the last product that DRZO made before she left. So the pandemic obviously took a beating on the company. Their sales dropped off. Market shipping was limited. There was all these sorts of problems. And so this Johan Larsson didn't seem to deliver on his goals. Within a couple of years, he's out in 2023. He blames the pandemic. He also blamed the Ukraine war. I'm not quite sure why. I just read the press release. And the guy who takes over as acting CEO is the marketing director. So last year, there was their 25th anniversary. They did this big party. They had these special casks. Everything was exciting. And by August 24, they filed for bankruptcy. Now, this was a problem because everybody's a little stunned. How do you run out of money like this? But I think it's just they were over leveraged financially and were expecting constant growth and just were caught with their pants down on the pandemic and weren't able to get their refinancing done. But like most whiskey companies, they had a lot of barrels in storage, including all these custom barrelings they started back in 2019. So there was all these folks who had paid for these barrels who wanted them back, but now they were locked down into bankruptcy. And it's like, but wait, we paid for that barrel. And it turned out they didn't pay for the barrel. They paid for the liquor that was inside the barrel. The barrel was still owned by the company and that was controlled and they weren't allowed to access it. So there was a big row over that. And plus they were all under bond. So they hadn't paid tax on it. So you couldn't get it out without paying the tax on it. So it was locked up. And out of this comes, in the fall last year, this guy named Lennart Hero, who had joined the board back in 23 when Larsson left. So I think he came in. He's a fairly famous Swedish investor. He had a fair bit of money. And so he did some bridge financing in 23 and came in as a board member. And then when the bankruptcy thing goes down, he leaves. But by October, he comes back with another investment company called Number One Capital. They refinance. He brings it out of bankruptcy. They're generally cheering him as a hero, which is funny because that's his name. But it looks like it was a tactic that he wasn't happy with the way the company was running. But it's right now, if you go to the website, and I think you pulled this up for a moment there, Micah, the only thing it says on the website is, don't worry, we're going to make everybody whole. Just watch this. So the main website, there's nothing to see right now because of all of this turmoil. So I also provided a whiskey-based link because if you actually want to look at Brukswhisky, that's what it's about. Brukswhisky is a classic style of sherry cask whiskey. It hasn't got an age on it per se. It's probably an 8-year-old. They do Swedish oak with a sherry finish. It's about 60 US if you can find it at 40% ABV. And it's completely drinkable. It's a perfectly normal whiskey, which is impressive for a small company that hadn't been around for very long and is now, struggling to come back out of it. And we'll see what happens. The experience of these young new age whiskey companies has been just up, right? Can't go wrong. And this is one of the rock stars of the new age that just has fallen on hard times for any number of reasons. And I think it'll have to come down to a lack of experienced leadership. Dan Daniel, I appreciate, stepped aside immediately when he knew he was over his head. They just got the wrong guy to fill in and he couldn't find his way forward. The way you run a company when you're in trouble is different. And finding the right person for that is hard. And so leadership has been the problem, and they've taken a really good company and got it right heavily on the rocks. Hopefully they can pull themselves out. But it was not the story I originally
On
intended
the
to tell. I wanted to
rocks.
talk about
Come on.
Swedish whiskey while I was in Sweden, and all of a sudden this craziness came out.